Thank you. Thank you. We can be seated. So for someone who for sure needs no introduction, but I would love to extend the extra kavod, the extra honor of a few words, Rabbi David Abramson, whose birthday was yesterday, so I think we need to do another Yom Huledet. Can we? Yom Huledet Sameach, Yom Huledet Sameach, Yom Huledet Sameach, Yom Huledet Sameach. So many more. Ad Me'avistrim. So he is a beautiful caregiver as a chaplain in our community for JESA, for the Jewish Social Service Agency, and also at the Hebrew Home, and also an important teacher in our community outside of Bethel and also here at Bethel as our adjunct rabbi. So he's here part-time with us, an important teacher of adults and of our B'nai Mitzvah students, and a leader in our daily minyan, and a teacher of Torah in our daily minyan, and so important in so many ways in our community. And I haven't even listed them all. So we are so lucky to have him teach this morning, Rabbi David Abramson.
Since we're devoting more attention to my birthday than we ought to, I'll mention that my Hebrew birthday was on Thursday and my secular birthday was on Friday. And it was absolutely Schrodinger's birthday, because on Thursday, was I 68 because it was my birthday, or was I 67 because my birthday was the next day? So, and they didn't even say there was going to be math in this today, so. So anyway, Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov and Chag Urim Sameach. That's the traditional Hebrew greeting for Hanukkah. Chag Urim, not Chag Purim, Chag Urim Sameach. Happy Festival of Lights. So, I sometimes wonder whether my pediatrician is still mad at me. I don't mean my own pediatrician. I mean the man who was my kid's doctor for 7 years when we lived in New England. He was one of the best doctors we'd had over the years, and he was a congregant, and he was also one of the best ritual committee chairmen that I've ever worked with. But he got mad at me, or at least he pretended to get mad at me, when in a Hanukkah sermon I gave, I think around 1991, I suggested that maybe, just maybe, the story of the oil burning for 8 days was not factually true. He didn't appreciate my bursting the bubble that he had lived in since childhood. And maybe I've just burst some of your bubbles as well, because I've just suggested to you that maybe, just maybe, the story of the oil burning for 8 days is only a fiction. But I've got to tell you that it's not only the dubious historical veracity of the story that has me rolling my eyes when I hear it. For many people, it seems that the oil burning for 8 days is the primary significance of Hanukkah. That's what they taught me in Sunday school. Hanukkah is the holiday of miracles, and one of the primary miracles was that when the Maccabees rededicated the temple following the defeat of the Syrian Greeks, the sanctified oil for the menorah was expected to last for only 1 day, and yet it lasted for 8 days. A miracle. Maybe. Let me tell you about a yahrzeit candle that I had once about 8 or 10 years ago. One night I had yahrzeit, and so before going to shul, I lit the candle in the evening, and then I went off to minyan. And you know those little candles are made with enough wax to burn for 24 hours or so. Well, the following evening, having attended minyan at the conclusion of the yahrzeit, I came home, and the yahrzeit candle was still burning. And this was now 25 or 26 hours after I had lit it. I checked on the candle in the course of that night. After 28 hours, it was still burning. After 29 hours, it was still burning. I stayed up late that night. And that 24-hour yahrzeit candle burned for 31 hours. A miracle. Or maybe not. As Freud might have said, sometimes a long-burning candle is just a long-burning candle. So my problem with the story of the oil burning for 8 days is that it yields an oversimplification of the Hanukkah story that I think reduces the holiday to a story of an oil candelabrum burning longer than expected. Now, don't get me wrong. This version of the Hanukkah story is fine for little kids. But older kids, and we grown-ups, deserve a more complete, a more complex version of the Hanukkah story, one that can make the holiday really relevant in our lives. There's another aspect of the Hanukkah story that also oversimplifies the holiday to the point of irrelevance, I think. This explanation is more commonly heard in Orthodox circles, but surely it was part of my Sunday school understanding of the holiday here in this conservative synagogue of my childhood. In this simplistic understanding of Hanukkah, the good guys and the bad guys are clear, and the issues over which they fought are equally clear. The bad guys are the Syrian Greeks, and the good guys are the Jews. Hellenism is bad, Judaism is good. And when the Hellenists oppressed the Jews, trying to impose their culture on the Jews fought back. And Hanukkah is the holiday that celebrates not only the Jews' military resistance, but their cultural and religious resistance to Hellenism, which continued long after the Maccabean revolt. And so for some Jews, Hanukkah is the holiday that celebrates our ancestors' staunch resistance to the dominant culture that surrounded them, and that challenges us to resist the influences of the dominant culture that surrounds us. But that doesn't work for probably most of us in this shul, at least. Most of us do not live insular lives separated from modern American culture. Most of us in this room, for example, pursued secular university educations, and for many of us, secular postgraduate educations as well, rather than sitting in yeshivas and studying Tanakh and Talmud exclusively. As an undergraduate philosophy major, for example, I studied Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and I didn't feel that I was shirking in my commitment to Judaism and Jewish culture by studying these Greek philosophers. And beyond our academic training, most of us participate extensively in the dominant culture of our time and place. Literature and music and theater and film and so on and so on. So if Hanukkah is about more than long-burning oil and more than insulating ourselves totally from secular culture, then what is it about? Well, there's a wonderful book that I first encountered in my college years. It's by Elias Bickerman, and it's entitled From Ezra to the Last of the Maccabees. Remember that name, the name of the author, and remember the title, Bickerman, From Ezra to the Last of the Maccabees. Originally published in 1962, I believe it was republished in 2015, and you can find, I checked yesterday afternoon, you can find copies of it on Amazon and other online sources. Bickerman's book presents what I like to call the real story of Hanukkah. When I was first exposed to Bickerman close to 50 years ago, it elevated Hanukkah to a whole new level of meaning for me, and the depth of that appreciation for the real story of Hanukkah has stayed with me for decades. So let me share with you some of the real story of Hanukkah. Now, Bickerman assures us that much of the traditional story of Hanukkah is historically accurate, and this includes the Syrian oppression of the Jews, their attempt to eradicate Judaism, and of course the Jews' war for religious freedom. But there are other details in the real story. By the 2nd century BCE, Hellenism already had exerted much influence among Jews for some time. Greek culture was based upon education, its claim was universal, it was open to all. But traditional Judaism was resistant, as it always had been resisted, to outside influences. But, as Bickerman writes, to a man of the Hellenistic age, this separation from the nations could be regarded as nothing else than the expression of a Jewish hatred of mankind. To advanced Jews, therefore, it seemed imperative to let those barriers fall. And of course, the Syrian Greeks were happy to help topple those barriers. Antiochus IV, the Syrian Greek king, entrusted the position of Kohen Gadol, of high priest, to a Hellenized Jew named Jason, and later to another Hellenized Jew named Menelaus. These Jewish Hellenists received royal approval for establishing a Greek community in Jerusalem. Hellenism first affected the upper classes, Jerusalemites, and the priesthood. Jews tried to look Greek and talk Greek and behave Greek. There were many Jews who embraced Hellenism, its lifestyle, its culture, its appeal. Jason and Menelaus desired to accommodate traditional Judaism to the times. As Bickerman writes, to remove everything which smacked of separation, of the ghetto, Sabbath observances, beards, circumcision. You see what's going on at this point in the story? Antiochus and his people are trying to impose Hellenistic culture on the Jews, and many of the Jews are embracing Hellenistic culture. And so the Maccabean revolt was a two-pronged struggle, fighting against the Syrian Empire and fighting against Hellenized Jews. Yes, in some ways, the Maccabean revolt was a civil war within the Jewish people. And the Jews were fighting with one another over the essential question of how much or how little we should assimilate into the dominant culture that surrounds us. Of course, the Maccabees won the war. The Maccabean victory resulted in the establishment of a new holiday. Now, all other Jewish festivals were biblical in origin. Never before in Jewish history had a festival been instituted at human hands. But notice the emphasis that emerged with this new holiday. Take a look at Al-Hanissim, the prayer which we added to the Shacharit Amidah, and we will add to the Musaf Amidah as well. The prayer with which we thank God for the Hanukkah miracles. You can find it on page 430 in Sidur Lev Shalem. In this prayer, it is clear that the victory is God's. God who prevailed over the Syrian Greek oppressors in defense of the Israelites. And the story of the oil burning for 8 days seems to have emerged in the Jewish community clearly to add an element of miraculousness to the story. That is, to further stress God's role in these events. But while the creation of this new holiday was an innovation without precedent in the Jewish world, it was in accord with the practice of the Gentiles, of the Hellenists, who declared festivals to mark events in their own history. Wait a minute. Weren't the Maccabees fighting against Hellenism? Well, yeah, but it's not so simple. By creating a new holiday, as the Greeks created new holidays to mark their triumphs, but by incorporating into it the notion of God's miraculous intervention in history, Bickerman explains, Judah, that's Judah Maccabee, imitated the practice of his enemies, but at the same time incorporated it into Judaism. Now, what followed during the reign of Judah's successors and in subsequent generations was a process of incorporating a lot of Greek influences into Judaism. The Talmud, for example, is full of Greek names and terminology, Greek legal concepts, even theological concepts that find their origin in Hellenistic culture. So you might ask, didn't the Maccabees allow just the thing that they had fought against? Well, there is a subtle but significant difference between the two. As Bickerman writes, the Hellenized Jews wished to assimilate the Torah into Hellenism. The Maccabees wished to incorporate Hellenistic culture in the Torah. I'll repeat that sentence because it's really crucial. The Hellenized Jews wished to assimilate the Torah into Hellenism. The Maccabees wished to incorporate Hellenistic culture into Torah. The distinction between the two positions is a subtle one, and yes, this distinction makes all the difference in the world. The Hellenistic Jews against whom the Maccabees fought wanted to accommodate Judaism to Hellenism. The Maccabees allowed Hellenism to influence Judaism, but in ways that were still faithful to Jewish tradition. In short, the Maccabees struggled with many of the same issues that we struggle with today. How much or how little to assimilate into the dominant culture? The choices were simpler for Tevye, or for Jews of Muncie or Mea Sharim. But most of us neither advocate nor are products of such an insulated Jewish life. We struggle with the tensions of participating in non-Jewish society and at the same time trying to maintain Judaism, because it is our lot in life here in the modern world, and because we would have it no other way. But the Maccabees didn't hide behind ghetto walls either. They defiantly stood up for themselves when the circumstances demanded it. They staunchly fought those Jews who, in their zeal for assimilation and acceptance, had lost sight of what was crucial in Judaism. The Maccabees accepted those innovations in Judaism, even those with non-Jewish origins, when those innovations enhanced and strengthened Jewish life. On this tightrope that they walked, they achieved balance. And that's our challenge on Hanukkah as well, to understand our ancestors' struggles in all of their complexity and to allow their struggles to illuminate our own. So Chag Urim Sameach.